Let's explain the working principle of MTS Guitar Tuning System. Mr. Green Hat pulls the string so that the pitch of the open string is correct. Mr. Red Hat got on the first fret, believing that the position of fret was correct, so he could make a perfect semitone. Since Mr. Red Hat got on the string, Mr. Green Hat had to pull with more force than ever. A big thing happened here. Mr. Green Hat increased the tension of the string and pulled it, so the pitch of the semitone became a little sharp. The phenomenon that the pitch sharpens when you hold down a string like this occurs in a normal guitar. MTS is the way to get rid of this. Mr. Red Hat asked Mr. Green Hat to relax his pulling force a little. Then what about the first fret, which is exactly half a pitch higher? Next, Mr. Red Hat tried to get off the first fret and make an open string sound. He believed that it would be exactly a semitone lower because he got off first fret. But the open string became flat. So the method that Mr. Green Hat thought was to hold a slightly shorter length. Mr. Green Hat knew that the pitch of open strings would be correct if the length of the string was short, even if the pulling force was small. What about then? The open string pitch has become a proper pitched sound. Hold a little short delta N. Mr. Green Hat said. The string pillow does this. Mr. Red Hat decided to ride the first fret again to see if the correct pitch sound was produced. What about that? Mr. Green Hat is pulling the string with a slightly loosened force, so this time he was able to raise the correct semitone pitch sound with one shot. Now the open string and the first fret are in the correct pitch. It's a big happy ending. The MTS principle is to compensate for the length of the delta N at the nut position. When installing the MTS on a real guitar, we also adjust the octave pitch adjustment by the saddle. Guitar with MTS installed will now produce the correct pitch sound no matter which fret is pressed. Various types of strings are used in guitars, such as thin strings, thick strings, and strings with windings. Shown here are the strings used in the most common acoustic guitars. They are distinguished by the difference in thickness, so-called gauge. There are differences in the thickness of the cord even for wound strings. Of course, the unit length weight, which is the weight per centimeter of the strings, is also different. That is, all 6 strings have their own differences. Since it is stretched as an open string so that it has different pitches, it is easy to understand that there are different tensions pulling the strings. Although it is specialized, the value of so-called stress, which is obtained by dividing the tension by the cross-sectional area of the core wire, is also different for all 6. The 6 strings have different faces when used, so when you press the strings on the frets, the pitch deviation is different for each string. It will be different. This is the point of MTS. According to the nut, the string length is compensated by delta N. In MTS, the compensated value is different for each string. Shown the 2 installation examples on the right, MTS is installed using a string pillow or offset nut with a step string position according to the optimum value of delta N. The basic theory of MTS is built on the engineering of material mechanics. When a string stretched under a certain stress is strained, its tension changes slightly. This is a very basic principle in the field of material mechanics. Here, stress is called stress in English. Stress is a numerical value used to see how much force is exerted inside an object, and is the value obtained by dividing the string tension S0 by the cross-sectional area. Think of distortion as the slight stretch of a string when it is pressed by the frets. In this figure, the value is delta epsilon. For guitars with high string height, the numerical value of delta epsilon, which is the distortion when the fret is pressed, becomes large. In MTS, in order to find the value of the tension change when a string stretched under a certain stress is distorted and its tension changes, a value that indicates the easiness of the pitch of each string is called K. Introduced a factor. The value of Ke largely depends on what kind of stress the string was stretched on. I will explain how stress is different with a practical example. Please refer to the table and figure on the left for reference. Even if the strings are stretched with the same tension, the stress of thick strings is small and the stress of thin strings is large. When a slight external stress is applied to the fret such that the string is pressed by the fret, the thick string with less stress is greatly affected. In other words, even if the tensions of the strings are the same, the thicker strings with less stress have larger pitch deviations. With an acoustic guitar, the second string should have a larger pitch deviation than the first string. In other words, the difference in the ease of pitch deviation between strings is not simply determined by whether the tension of the string is large or small, or whether the outer diameter of the string is thick or thin, but the tension and the thickness of the core wire dotted is determined by the value of stress, which is determined by the balance of. The reason why I called the core wire thickness here is that the tension of the string acts only on the core wire. In this way, the tuning system was constructed using the strength of the force acting inside the material and the factor called stress, when analyzing an instrument such as a guitar with MTS. This idea was introduced for the first time in the world. Now, the frequency of the string is determined by the tension. I decided to calculate how much this frequency F would come when the string was pressed by the frets, as delta F. This is an intonation error. This delta F, that is, the intonation error, is calculated from Ke, which is a numerical value that indicates the degree of pitch deviation of each string, and delta epsilon, which is the distortion obtained when the string is pressed by the frets and is calculated from the slight elongation of the string. Of course, for a guitar with a high string height, the value of delta epsilon, which is the distortion when the fret is pressed, is large, so it can be said that the pitch deviation is large. As described above, the intonation error, which is the pitch error, is taken into account by incorporating all factors such as the string tension and stress determined by the type of the string, its gauge, the pitch of the open string, and the string height setting of the guitar. Delta F is calculated, and MTS is completed as a system that calculates the correction value of the nut and saddle so that the value becomes the smallest. This made it possible to derive the optimum string pillow dimensions for guitars with various types of strings. Lastly, I will explain how to derive the optimum values for the nut and saddle compensation values from the intonation error, delta F, and how dramatically the pitch of the guitar can be improved as a result. This page shows how to calculate the optimum values for the nut and saddle compensation. The figure on the upper left shows the concept of saddle compensation and how to calculate the compensation amount D lat L. If it is a normal good guitar, it seems that the saddle has been compensated and the octave adjustment has been improved by adjusting the dimension of D lat L calculated here. But some guitars have insufficient octave adjustment. You can see it very often. It's a so-called high-position guitar with sharp pitch. The figure below shows the sixth string of an acoustic guitar, but the leftmost is the adjustment of the saddle. So-called octave adjustment is not performed on each fret when the saddle is not compensated. It shows the pitch deviation. With a perfect octave adjustment, the pitch deviation on each fret is greatly improved, as shown in the middle graph below, but the pitch deviation on the low frets still remains. A normal good guitar is considered to be in this state. It is MTS that installs the string pillow in this state and further improves the pitch accuracy. The nut compensation dimensions for the string pillow are calculated using the formula in the upper right figure. In each of these formulas, the intonation error and delta F terms explained on the previous page are included, and all correction values are numerical values that indicate the degree of pitch deviation for each string. You can see that it is calculated from K and the distortion when the string is pressed by the fret, delta epsilon. When the string pillow is installed and nut compensation is performed, the saddle compensation D-lat L value must be the value obtained by subtracting the nut compensation D-lat N value from the initial saddle compensation only value. If you don't do this, the pitch of the octave will tend to be more negative than it used to be. In other words, when installing MTS using the string pillow, at the same time, it is necessary to perform optimum saddle compensation again. When the nut and saddle are perfectly compensated as described above, the pitch error on all the frets dramatically improves the pitch accuracy, as shown in the graph on the far right. In this example, even the maximum deviation is 1.3 cents, so it has been improved to a level where the human ear can no longer recognize the deviation. This is MTS. This completes the explanation of the operating principle of MTS.